The rancher ordered a bride, but her sister stepped off the wagon instead. A desperate man's mail-order marriage plan derailed by a single moment of mistaken identity. What happens when the heart wants one thing, but destiny delivers another? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Carter stood beside his wagon at the trading post in Abilene, Kansas. His eyes scanning the horizon for the 100th time that afternoon. The photograph he'd carried for months was worn at the edges from constant handling. In it, Mary Smith looked delicate and demure, with gentle curls framing her face and eyes cast downward in a way that spoke of feminine modesty. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, seemed to promise the tenderness he'd craved after years of hard ranch work. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as John tugged at his collar, suddenly aware of how his best shirt felt too tight around his neck. 6 months of letters had built a dream of companionship that now hung in the balance. He'd prepared everything, expanded the ranch house, added curtains to the windows, even planted wildflowers along the path to the door. "Wagon coming," called a trader, pointing toward a dust cloud rising in the distance. John's heart hammered against his ribs. He straightened his vest and ran a hand through his hair, wondering if Mary would find him handsome enough. The approaching wagon seemed to crawl across the prairie, each minute stretching into eternity as the rancher rehearsed his greeting in his mind. When the travel wagon finally pulled into the trading post, John stepped forward, hat in hand. The driver set the brake and jumped down, moving to help his passenger. John held his breath, the photograph's image vivid in his mind. But the woman who emerged wasn't Mary Smith. This woman moved with purpose, her stride confident as her boots hit the ground. Dark hair pulled back severely from her face, accentuated sharp cheekbones and eyes that flashed green as prairie grass after rain. Where Mary's hands in the photograph had been soft and unblemished, this woman's were strong and marked with calluses that spoke of hard work. She spotted John immediately, assessing him with a directness that made him step back slightly. There was no shyness in her approach, no downcast eyes or hesitant smile. Instead, she walked straight to him, her simple brown traveling dress dusty from the journey. "You must be John Carter," she said, her voice carrying the edge of someone accustomed to speaking her mind. John nodded, unable to find words as confusion washed over him. "I'm Anna, not Mary," she continued, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "Anna." She offered no explanation, no apology for the deception. The world seemed to shift beneath John's boots. All his careful preparations, the letters exchanged, the promises made, everything suddenly stood on uncertain ground. The woman before him wasn't the bride he'd ordered, but her sister instead, and the look in her eyes told him this was only the beginning of revelations to come. Anna wore a simple brown dress, faded at the hem from hard travel, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had weathered storms and walked away unscathed. The Kansas sun caught the determined set of her shoulders as she stood before John Carter, neither yielding nor apologetic. Their eyes met in a silent measuring, both searching for truth in the other's face. And somewhere in that charged moment, the air between them crackled with possibility and fear. "Where's Mary?" John blurted, unable to hide the tension in his voice, his calloused hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The carefully rehearsed greeting forgotten in the shock of the moment. Anna's jaw set, a muscle tightening beneath her skin. She glanced back at the wagon, where the driver was already unhitching the horses, his movements hurried and deliberate as he avoided their gaze. The man seemed intent on completing his task as quickly as possible, as if he could feel the storm brewing between the rancher and this unexpected arrival. "There's been a change of plans," she said, slinging a battered leather satchel over her shoulder with practiced ease. The worn bag looked as though it had traveled far and held many secrets. "We need to talk." John studied her face, noting the stubborn lift of her chin and the way her green eyes never wavered from his. Unlike the downcast gaze in Mary's photograph, Anna's stare challenged him, measured him, assessed his worth in ways that made him suddenly conscious of his dust-covered clothes and the sweat staining his collar. "I don't understand," he said, his voice dropping to prevent the curious onlookers at the trading post from hearing. The arrangement was clear. "The letters? Not here," Anna cut him off, her voice low but firm. She shifted the satchel, and John noticed the calluses on her hands, hands that had clearly known work, not the delicate fingers he'd imagined holding Mary's pen. The driver, eager to be away from whatever trouble Anna brought, didn't even look back as he hurried to finish his work. He secured the last harness with a quick, nervous movement, then climbed onto the wagon seat with obvious relief. "Fare's been paid," the man called out, already flicking the reins. "Good luck to you both." The words carried an ominous weight as the wagon pulled away, leaving Anna and John standing in the settling dust, surrounded by the bustling activity of the trading post, yet somehow utterly alone. John looked from Anna's determined face to the departing wagon and back again, realizing that whatever life he had planned was unraveling before his eyes, and this fierce-eyed stranger held all the threads. The trading post buzzed with activity, curious eyes darting between John Carter and the unfamiliar woman standing before him. Settlers haggled over supplies, cowboys exchanged stories over whiskey, and traveling salesmen peddled their wares, all while stealing glances at what appeared to be an unfolding drama. John shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of the attention. This wasn't a conversation for public consumption. He drew a deep breath, steadying himself against the wagon wheel. You've been writing to me for 6 months, he said, his voice deliberately measured. About the wedding, about everything, those letters. Anna stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. Her presence was startlingly different from what John had imagined all these months. Earthy and real, not the delicate flower Mary had portrayed herself as. The scent of sweat and dust clung to her travel-worn clothes, a stark contrast to the rosewater Mary had described in her correspondence. Up close, John noticed the tiny scar above Anna's right eyebrow, the weathered quality of her skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "Some things you need to know," she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper, trembling with the weight of secrets. "Some things that were never mine to tell you in the first place." The heaviness in her words made John's stomach twist. A passing trader bumped against them, muttering an apology before moving on. The rancher glanced around at the crowded trading post. Too many ears, too many eyes. "Not here," he decided, gesturing toward the edge of the settlement where cottonwood trees offered some privacy. "Whatever you need to say, I'd rather not have the whole of Abilene hearing it." Anna nodded, relief flickering across her features. As they walked, John noticed how she carried herself, shoulders back, stride purposeful, nothing like the demure posture he'd imagined in Mary. The contrast was jarring. "I never meant for things to get this complicated," Anna said as they reached the shade of the trees. "You have to believe that." John studied her face, searching for deceit, but finding only exhaustion and something that looked remarkably like guilt. The wind picked up, carrying dust from the trail and the distant sound of a piano from the saloon. "I've spent half a year preparing for a bride," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. "Building a home, planning a future. I deserve the truth, all of it." Anna's green eyes met his, unflinching despite the shame that colored her cheeks. "You do," she agreed, "and I'll tell you everything. But John," she hesitated, his name sounding different in her voice than he'd imagined it in Mary's letters. "Once I start, there's no going back to the life you thought you were going to have." "Where is she, Anna?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority that made his ranch hands snap to attention. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. John Carter had spent months preparing for a bride who wasn't standing before him. Anna didn't flinch. Her green eyes held his gaze with a steadiness that spoke of someone who had faced down worse than an angry rancher. The trading post bustled around them, but neither seemed to notice the curious glances from passers-by. "That depends on how much truth you can handle, John Carter, because once I start talking, there's no going back to the life you thought you were going to have." Her calloused fingers tightened around the worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder, as if it contained all the secrets she was reluctant to share. The noise of the trading post seemed to fade away. The haggling over goods, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant laughter from the hotel porch, leaving only the electric tension between them. John felt his world tilting, everything he'd planned for slipping through his fingers like Kansas dust. "I've built my life on honesty," he said, his voice lower now. "Whatever you're carrying, I deserve to hear it." But even as the words left his mouth, fear gripped his heart. What had happened to the gentle Mary from the photograph? What storm had this fierce woman brought to his doorstep? Anna studied his face, searching for something, weakness perhaps, or determination. Whatever she found made her nod slightly. Decision made. "I can handle whatever truth you're carrying," he said, though his heart hammered with uncertainty. 6 months of letters, of planning, of building a future with a woman who wasn't here, all of it threatened to crumble beneath Anna's unflinching stare. She scanned the crowd with practiced wariness, noting the sheriff's deputy leaning against a hitching post, the stagecoach driver watching them with undisguised interest, the women whispering behind gloved hands. Her posture shifted, suddenly alert like a deer sensing danger. "Your place, not here." The words were a challenge, not a request. "These walls have ears, and what I need to tell you isn't for them." John hesitated, weighing the propriety of taking an unmarried woman, a stranger, back to his ranch alone. But the urgency in her voice left little room for social niceties. "My wagon's around back," he said finally, gesturing toward the alley behind the trading post. As they walked side by side, not touching but acutely aware of each other's presence, John realized he was already crossing lines he could never uncross. Whatever Anna was about to reveal would change everything, and somewhere deep inside, he knew his life would never be the same again. They climbed onto the wagon seat, Anna moving with the ease of someone who had spent years around horses and hard work. John Carter noticed how she didn't hesitate or need assistance. Unlike the delicate Mary he'd imagined from their correspondence, the leather of the seat creaked beneath them as he flicked the reins, urging the horses forward with a gentle command. The ride to his ranch was silent, thick with unspoken questions and the growing awareness of each other's presence. Anna sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, her profile sharp against the golden Kansas landscape. The rancher kept his eyes on the trail, but he couldn't help noticing how she stole glances when she thought he wasn't looking. Quick, assessing looks that seemed to measure both him and the situation they found themselves in. Every time their eyes accidentally met, a jolt passed between them, something raw and unnameable, deeper than the missing sister or broken promises. John cleared his throat, adjusting his grip on the reins as they crossed a shallow creek. The wagon wheels splashed through the water, breaking the silence momentarily before the rhythmic creak of wood and leather returned. "How long have you lived out here?" Anna finally asked, her voice carrying over the sound of hoofbeats. 4 years, he replied, gesturing toward the horizon. "Bought the land when most folks thought it wasn't worth much." She nodded appreciatively, and he caught a glimpse of respect in those fierce green eyes. The rancher found himself wondering what life had been like for the sisters after their father died. What hardships had given Anna those calloused hands and that determined set to her jaw? As they crested a gentle hill, his property came into view, the modest ranch house nestled between rolling hills. Bathed in late afternoon sunlight, John felt a sudden sharp awareness of all his preparations, the freshly painted blue shutters, the wildflowers carefully planted by the steps, the new rocking chair on the porch. All for Mary, a woman who had never truly existed outside Anna's letters. Anna's breath caught audibly as she took in the scene. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, something vulnerable flickering across her face before the mask of determination returned. John felt an unexpected twist of pride, mixed with regret. The home he'd built with such care was meant for someone else, yet the woman beside him seemed to understand its value in a way he suspected her sister might not have. As the wagon rolled closer to the house, the weight of all his hopes and plans settled around him, alongside the unsettling realization that nothing was as he had believed it to be. As they approached the modest ranch house, nestled among the rolling Kansas hills, Anna's eyes widened with appreciation. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the whitewashed walls and sturdy wooden porch. John Carter slowed the wagon to a stop, suddenly self-conscious about the home he'd built with another woman in mind. "You built this yourself?" Anna asked, her gaze taking in the careful craftsmanship of the porch railings and the freshly painted shutters framing each window. "Most of it," John replied, feeling strangely vulnerable under her scrutiny. "Hired help for the roof and some of the interior work. But the rest," he trailed off with a modest shrug. The pride he usually felt in his accomplishment was now tinged with uncertainty. He climbed down from the wagon seat and moved around to her side, extending his hand to help her down. Anna hesitated for just a moment before placing her palm against his. Their hands met in that simple gesture of assistance, but something electric passed between them, a current of awareness that neither had anticipated. Her fingers were strong and calloused against his weathered palm, so different from the delicate hands he had imagined in Mary's photograph. Yet there was something undeniably right about the feel of her hand in his. "It's beautiful," Anna murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper, as she stepped down from the wagon. Her eyes remained fixed on the ranch house, but her hand lingered in his grip. They stood frozen in that moment, neither willing to break the connection. The sounds of the prairie, birds calling, tall grass rustling in the breeze, faded into the background. All John could focus on was the warmth of her skin against his and the unexpected intimacy of this simple touch. Anna's eyes finally met his, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or possibility. The realization that this contact felt more significant than it should have seemed to hit them both simultaneously. With visible effort, she pulled her hand away, tucking it against her side as though to preserve the sensation. A flush crept up her neck, coloring her cheeks with a warmth that made the fierce woman suddenly appear younger, more vulnerable. John cleared his throat, fighting the urge to reach for her again. The heat of her palms seemed to linger on his skin, a phantom touch that refused to fade even as she stepped away toward the house. "We should go inside," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "There's much to discuss." Anna nodded, composing herself with visible effort as she followed him toward the home he had built for her sister. Inside the ranch house, Anna paused at the doorway, her hand lingering on the worn wooden frame. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots as she turned to face John Carter, her expression suddenly grave. "Before we do this, before I tell you everything, you need to understand. After today, you'll see me differently. You'll see everything differently." The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and lighting flecks of gold in her green eyes. For the first time since stepping off the wagon, uncertainty shadowed her face, replacing the fierce determination that had carried her this far. John studied her, noticing how the sunlight softened her features, how different she looked from the photograph he'd memorized of Mary. Where Mary's image had promised gentleness and submission, Anna radiated strength and something wild that called to him despite everything. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said, the words surprising them both. The rancher moved toward the small table he'd crafted with his own hands, running calloused fingers across the surface meant for a different woman's touch. Anna's eyes widened, vulnerability flashing across her face. Her shoulders tensed as she clutched her leather satchel tighter. "You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" he replied, stepping closer, drawn in despite himself. The scent of prairie dust and something uniquely her filled the space between them. "Maybe I'm tired of living a life based on letters and photographs. Maybe I want something real." The words hung in the air, dangerous and thrilling. Anna's breath caught, and for a moment, John thought she might step toward him, closing the distance that seemed both vast and impossibly small. Instead, she swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Real isn't always what you want it to be," she whispered. "Real can hurt you." "I've been hurt before," John answered, thinking of Lucas Borges and the business in Denver that had crumbled beneath lies and betrayal. "At least with truth, you know where you stand." Anna looked up then, meeting his eyes with a directness that made his heart hammer against his ribs. "And where do we stand, John Carter? You were supposed to marry my sister today. Instead, you're standing in your home with me, a stranger who's about to tear your world apart." The question lingered between them, unanswered, but alive with possibility. Outside, the Kansas wind picked up, whistling through the eaves of the house he'd built for a woman who existed only in ink and paper. Anna's expression hardened again, and she stepped back. "Be careful what you wish for, John Carter," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper, "because what I'm about to tell you involves blood, betrayal, and a secret that could destroy everything you think you know about the woman you plan to marry." The weight of her words hung between them like a physical presence. John felt his throat tighten, but he nodded, silently urging her to continue. This was not the future he had imagined when he'd started exchanging those letters months ago. But something in him needed to hear the truth, no matter how painful. Inside the ranch house, Anna moved through the main room, trailing her fingers over the hand-carved furniture and the table set for two. Her calloused fingertips brushed against the polished wood, lingering on the intricate details he had spent evenings perfecting. The home felt different with her in it. Not the soft, gentle presence he had imagined with Mary, but something wilder, more unpredictable. "You made all this?" she asked, pausing at the dining table where he had arranged wildflowers in a ceramic vase. "Most of it," John replied. "Took me all winter." Anna nodded, understanding the dedication such work required. She moved to the window, looking out at the Kansas landscape stretching toward the horizon. "It's a good place," she said softly. "Honest." John watched her, feeling the reality of the situation settle around him. He'd built this home for a woman who had never truly existed. The letters, the shared dreams, the future he had planned, all of it based on words written by the woman standing before him now, not her sister. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Write those letters pretending to be Mary?" Anna turned from the window, her fierce green eyes meeting his. "I thought I was helping her," she said, "helping us both." She looked down at her hands, strong and weathered from work. "I never expected—" "Expected what?" John pressed. "To feel guilty," she admitted. "To wonder what it might have been like if—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you understand what's happening, the danger you're in." John moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. Anna took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for battle. "It started 6 months ago, when a man came to our boarding house. A man who knew things about you that no stranger should know." "Mary never wanted to marry you," Anna said abruptly, exhaustion etched in the lines of her face. "Not from the beginning." The words landed like a physical blow, but John Carter maintained his composure, years of ranch work having taught him to weather unexpected storms. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table he'd built with his own hands, the table where he'd imagined sharing meals with a wife who apparently never existed. Then why did she agree? Why the letters, the arrangements? His voice remained steady despite the turmoil inside him. The home he'd prepared, the future he'd planned, all built on what now seemed like shifting sand. Because she was desperate, Anna replied, sinking into a chair. The wooden legs creaked under her weight as she leaned forward, her fierce green eyes now dulled with fatigue and guilt. Our father died last winter, left us with debts that would have taken everything. She paused, running calloused fingers through a loose strand of dark hair that had escaped her tight bun. The late afternoon sun, through the window, caught the movement, highlighting the strength in hands that had clearly known hard work. Mary was 17 and terrified, she continued. The creditors were circling like vultures. They would have taken our mother's jewelry, the family Bible, everything we had left of her. Anna's voice cracked slightly, revealing the depth of their loss. I'm the older sister. I thought I could fix it. John paced across the room, boots heavy on the wooden floor he'd laid himself. All those letters about dreams and hopes. I thought I could find her a good man who would take care of her. Anna interrupted, her eyes following his movement. Someone honorable. When I saw your advertisement, I investigated you, asked around. People respect you, John. She looked down at her hands, now clasped tightly in her lap. So I wrote the letters. I told myself it was just to get things started, that Mary would take over once she understood what a good match you were. A bitter smile crossed her face. The woman you thought you knew, she was me. The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything. John stopped by the window, staring out at the Kansas landscape he'd come to love. The rolling hills seemed to mock him now, as empty as the promises he believed in. You fell in love with words on paper, Anna said softly. Words I wrote while sitting up nights, trying to save my sister from ruin. John turned away, needing distance to process the revelation. The rough-hewn walls of the ranch house seemed to close in around him as he paced across the wooden floorboards. Everything he thought he knew, the connection built through months of heartfelt correspondence, had been a carefully constructed illusion. The woman whose words had kept him company through lonely prairie nights had never truly existed. So all those letters, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, all those dreams and hopes and little secrets? That was you? He turned back to face Anna, whose eyes held a mixture of guilt and defiance. Yes, she admitted, her shoulders straightening slightly. I wrote what I thought Mary would say, what I believed would make you happy, what would make you want her. John ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of deception pressing down on him. The gentle soul who'd shared dreams and whispered hopes, who'd described her favorite flowers and childhood memories, had only existed in ink and imagination. Where is she now? He asked, his voice brittle as prairie grass in winter. Anna hesitated, staring at her hands. The calloused fingers that had penned all those beautiful words now twisted nervously in her lap. The rancher noticed how different they were from the delicate hands in the photograph. These were hands that had worked hard, that knew struggle. 3 days ago, a man came to our boarding house, she finally said, each word careful and measured. Someone from her past. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. He knew things about both of you, things I didn't know. John's stomach tightened. What kind of things? He told her things about you, John, things that made her believe you weren't the man I'd convinced her you were. Her voice trembled with guilt and fear. She was already scared about coming here, about marrying a stranger. It didn't take much to push her over the edge. The fading afternoon light cast long shadows across Anna's face, highlighting the weariness etched there. For a moment, John could see the burden she'd been carrying, trying to save her sister, crafting a future that wasn't hers to promise. "And you?" he asked, the question hanging between them. "Did you believe him too?" Anna's green eyes flashed. "I wouldn't be here if I did," she replied, her voice steadying. "I came because I needed to know the truth. Because whatever's happening, it's bigger than just a marriage arrangement gone wrong." John moved to the window, watching as the Kansas sunset painted the prairie in shades of amber and gold. The life he'd planned was unraveling thread by thread, but something else was taking shape in its place. Something unexpected and dangerous, yet somehow more real than anything he'd known before. "What things?" John demanded, anger rising in his chest. His hands clenched at his sides as the afternoon light cast long shadows across the ranch house floor. Anna met his gaze, fear flickering in her eyes. Not fear of him, but of what she needed to reveal. She took a deep breath, her calloused fingers gripping the edge of the wooden table. "He said you were already married," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you've done this before. Lucas told Mary you lure women out to Kansas with promises of marriage, then sell them to men in mining camps who are desperate for wives." She swallowed hard. "He said there were others before Mary, at least 3 women who disappeared after coming to meet you." John's face drained of color. "That's absurd," he breathed. But Anna continued before he could defend himself further. "He had documents, John. Letters from supposed victims, marriage certificates with your signature, photographs of women who looked terrified." She shook her head. "I didn't believe it, but the evidence seemed real enough to scare Mary. She was already nervous about coming here, about marrying a stranger. The documents just confirmed her worst fears." Before John could protest, Anna pressed on, her words tumbling out faster now. "She ran with him that night. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She said she'd rather take her chances with Lucas than end up—" Her voice trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. "I came here to warn you," she continued, meeting his eyes with newfound determination. "Whoever that man is, whatever he wants, this isn't over. He knows about you, about the ranch, about everything." Her hands shook as she spoke, the weight of her confession nearly overwhelming her. "The questions he asked before Mary arrived, the details he knew about your property, your finances, someone's been feeding him information for months." John paced across the room, his mind racing. "Why would Borges go to such lengths? What does he gain by taking your sister?" Anna's green eyes clouded with worry. "I don't know, but the way he looked at her—" She shuddered. "It wasn't just about you. He wanted her specifically. And now I've lost her." The rancher stopped pacing, a sudden realization dawning. "You didn't just come to warn me," he said quietly. "You came because you think I can help find her." Anna nodded, vulnerability replacing the fierce defiance she'd worn since stepping off the wagon. "You're my only hope, John Carter, because whatever Lucas Borges wants, it involves both of us now." John Carter paced across the wooden floorboards, his mind reeling. The betrayal cut deep, not just the deception about Mary, but the entire charade that had brought Anna to his doorstep. He ran his calloused hands through his hair, struggling to make sense of it all. "This man who took your sister," he finally said, turning to face Anna. "What did he look like?" Anna's eyes narrowed as she recalled the stranger. Tall, well-dressed, too fancy for our town. Gray hair, though his face seemed younger than his years. She paused, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on the table's rough surface. His eyes were what I remember most. Cold, like winter water. He seemed to enjoy watching Mary's distress when he showed her those papers. Something in her description stirred John's memory, a shadow from his past he'd tried desperately to forget. The rancher's jaw tightened as recognition began to dawn. "Did he give a name?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. Anna met his gaze directly. "Lucas Borges. He claimed to know you from before Abilene, before the ranch." The name landed between them, like a thunderclap in clear sky. John's face drained of color. He turned away, bracing himself against the mantelpiece, shame and anger flooding through him in equal measure. The memories rushed back with painful clarity. Denver, 3 years ago. The freight business he'd built from nothing. The partnership that had seemed so promising. "You know him," Anna said. It wasn't a question. "We were partners," John admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Borges and Carter Freight. We transported goods throughout Colorado territory." He paused, the bitterness of old wounds reopening. "I trusted him completely." Anna moved closer, her presence somehow steadying. "What happened?" "Money started disappearing. Clients complained about missing shipments." John's fist clenched against the wooden mantel. "When I confronted him, he'd already laid the groundwork, forged my signature on documents, bribed witnesses. By the time I cleared my name, he was gone with half our savings." Anna's green eyes flashed with understanding. "And now he's found you again." "Not by accident," John replied grimly. "If Borges is involved, this is about revenge. He destroyed my reputation in Denver, and now he's come to finish what he started." The rancher straightened, newfound determination replacing his shock. Lucas Borges had taken everything from him once before. The man who had ruined his past was now threatening his future, and had dragged an innocent young woman into his vengeful plot. "Whatever game he's playing," John said, his voice hardening with resolve, "we need to find your sister before it's too late." "You know him?" Anna asked, reading the pain etched across John's face. Her green eyes narrowed with concern as she leaned forward in the wooden chair. "I knew him," John Carter admitted, his voice hollow with old wounds. He ran a calloused hand through his hair, memories flooding back like a dam breaking. "We were partners in a freight business in Denver 3 years back. Everything was going well until supplies started disappearing. Clients complained about missing shipments." The rancher stood and paced across the rough wooden floorboards, unable to stay still as the past resurfaced. Lucas started stealing from clients, small things at first, then entire shipments. When I confronted him about the discrepancies in our ledgers, he turned it around, planted false evidence, made it look like I was the thief. Anna watched him carefully, measuring each word against what she already knew of Borges. "What happened then?" "By the time I cleared my name, he was gone, along with half our savings and my reputation in tatters." John's jaw tightened as he stared out the window toward the Kansas horizon. "I came here to start over. Never thought I'd hear his name again." Anna nodded grimly, her fingers tracing the worn edge of the table. "The documents he showed Mary were probably fake, just like before. But they looked real enough to frighten a 17-year-old girl." She hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to manipulate her fears. The confession hung heavy between them, weighted with implications. "When Mary left," Anna continued softly, "she took a letter that had come for you. I found her reading it in our room at the boarding house, crying. She hid it when I entered, but later I saw her take it when she fled with Borges." John turned sharply. "What letter? I wasn't expecting any correspondence." "I don't know what was in it," the dark-haired woman admitted, "but whatever it contained, it terrified her. She read it over and over, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing." Anna's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "After reading it, she kept saying your name, asking why you would do such things." John's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. They weren't just dealing with a jilted bride or a vengeful former partner. This was calculated, planned, a trap years in the making. "We're caught in something far more dangerous than I imagined," he said, meeting Anna's worried gaze. "Borges didn't just happen to find Mary. He's been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything I've built." John Carter leaned forward, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the wooden table. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the ranch house's main room, highlighting the tension etched across his weathered face. "Anna, was there anything else?" he asked, urgency sharpening his voice. Did Borges say anything strange? Anything that might tell us what he's really after? Anna tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear, her green eyes narrowing as she searched her memory. The simple brown dress she wore couldn't hide her strength as she shifted in the chair, the wood creaking beneath her. He knew things, she said finally. Things about the ranch, your plans to expand into cattle trading next spring, the money you've been saving in that Kansas City bank. Her voice dropped lower. He even mentioned the land dispute with your neighbor to the east. These aren't things a stranger would know, John. These are details only someone close to you would have access to. A chill ran through the rancher's body. The implications were clear, but he needed to hear them spoken aloud. That means either someone's been watching me for a long time, or someone you trust has been feeding him information, Anna finished, her eyes widening with sudden realization. John stood abruptly, pacing across the floor he'd laid with his own hands. The horror of betrayal settled in. The danger was closer than he'd ever dreamed. His mind raced through possibilities. His ranch hands, the banker in town, even the shopkeeper who'd helped arrange the mail-order bride situation. Who knows about your plans? Anna asked, rising to stand beside him. Who would have reason to help Borges destroy what you've built? The rancher ran a hand through his hair, mentally cataloging everyone who'd been privy to his business affairs. Not many. My foreman, Thomas, the banker. Sheriff Oliveira knows some of it. I needed permits for the new grazing land. Anna's breath caught. The sheriff, she whispered. When Borges came to our boarding house, he mentioned having friends in high places. I thought he was just boasting, but their eyes met, understanding passing between them like electricity. The betrayal cut deeper than John had imagined possible. If the sheriff was involved, they had precious few allies left. We need proof, he said firmly, reaching for his rifle mounted above the fireplace, checking it with practiced hands. And we need to move quickly. If Borges has the law on his side, Mary isn't the only one in danger. Anna nodded, determination hardening her features. I've been underestimated my whole life, John Carter. People talk freely when they think you're nothing but a servant girl. That might just be what saves us all. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley, cutting through the heavy silence that had settled between them. John and Anna moved to the window in unison, their shoulders nearly touching as they peered through the dusty glass. 3 riders approached the ranch, silhouettes darkening against the fading light of the Kansas sunset. Expecting company? Anna asked, tension threading her voice like a fine wire. Her green eyes narrowed as she studied the approaching figures. John Carter shook his head, his jaw tightening. Not at this hour. Without hesitation, he reached for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, the wood smooth beneath his calloused hands. The weight of it felt reassuring, a reminder of the life he'd built here, a life now threatened by secrets and lies. You know them? She whispered, never taking her eyes from the window. I might, he answered, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. As the riders drew near, John's blood ran cold. He recognized the lead horse, a black mare with distinctive white markings that belonged to Sheriff Roberto Oliveira. The lawman's mount trotted ahead of the others, kicking up dust that caught the last rays of sunlight. It's the sheriff, John muttered, his voice low enough that only Anna could hear. And he's not alone. Anna's fingers instinctively tightened around the leather satchel she'd kept close since her arrival. Is that normal? Him coming out this far? Nothing about today is normal, John replied, a grim smile touching his lips for just a moment. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, his face set in hard lines that spoke of official business. The 2 men flanking him remained astride their horses, hands hovering near their holsters, a silent threat that wasn't lost on John. One wore a badge that caught the light, not local, perhaps federal. The other, older and weathered, kept his hat pulled low. Stay behind me, John instructed Anna, but the defiant look she gave him made it clear she had no intention of hiding. "We're in this together now," she said firmly, standing straighter. "Whatever comes through that door." John nodded, surprised by the surge of respect he felt for this woman who'd arrived in place of his bride. In the space of a few hours, Anna had upended his world and then stood firmly within it, facing the consequences alongside him. Through the window, they watched Sheriff Oliveira adjust his gun belt and straighten his hat before starting toward the house. His companions remained vigilant, scanning the property with the practiced eyes of men accustomed to trouble. "Ready?" John asked, not looking at Anna, but feeling her presence beside him like a physical force. "As I'll ever be," she answered, and together they turned to face whatever justice or injustice awaited them at the door. "Evening, John," Sheriff Roberto Oliveira called, his voice heavy with authority as he approached the ranch house. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, highlighting the tension in the lawman's stance. "Need to have a word with you." John Carter stepped onto the wooden porch, feeling the boards creak beneath his boots. Anna moved beside him, her presence somehow both comforting and electrifying. The rancher noticed how the sheriff's gaze lingered on her, calculating and cold. "What's this about, Sheriff?" John asked, keeping his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. He'd known Roberto for 3 years, had even shared drinks at the local saloon. But something in the man's eyes now seemed foreign and dangerous. Oliveira's eyes flicked to Anna, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Miss, I need you to step aside. This is between me and Mr. Carter." His hand rested casually near his holster, a gesture that appeared natural but carried unmistakable threat. "She stays," John said firmly, squaring his shoulders. The brief touch of Anna's hand on his arm conveyed gratitude, and he drew strength from the contact. The two deputies flanking the sheriff exchanged glances, their hands hovering near their weapons. "I've got a warrant for your arrest, John," Oliveira announced, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Charges of fraud, theft, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, filed by Mr. Lucas Borges." He held up the document, the official seal visible even from the porch. The words struck like blows, but John refused to back down. "That's ridiculous, and you know it, Roberto." He felt Anna tense beside him, her breathing quickening with anger. "The evidence says otherwise," the sheriff replied, his voice carrying across the yard. "Witnesses place you forcing a young woman onto your wagon 3 days ago. Borges has signed statements." John's mind raced. 3 days ago, he'd been breaking horses with his ranch hands miles from town. "That's impossible," he growled, fighting to keep his voice level. "I haven't left this property in a week." The federal marshal stepped forward, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Then you won't mind coming with us to sort this out." It wasn't a question. Anna's fingers dug into John's arm, a silent warning not to act rashly. The rancher measured the distance to his rifle inside, knowing he'd never reach it in time. The lawmen had positioned themselves strategically, cutting off escape routes. "This is Borges' doing," John said, his voice carrying across the yard. "He's manipulating you, Sheriff, just like he manipulated others in Denver." Something flickered in Oliveira's eyes, doubt perhaps, or guilt, before his expression hardened again. "Save it for the judge, Carter. You're coming with us now." Anna stepped forward, her posture straight and unwavering. The fierce green eyes that had captivated John earlier now flashed with righteous anger as she positioned herself between him and the lawman. "That's a lie," she declared, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm Mary's sister. She's not missing. She left of her own free will with that man." Her calloused hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept them visible, aware of the tension crackling through the air. Sheriff Roberto Oliveira's weathered face remained impassive as his gaze shifted between Anna and John. "Miss, I understand you're upset, but the law is the law. Mr. Borges has 3 witnesses who saw her being forced into a wagon outside the general store in town. Says she was crying, begging for help. He adjusted his hat, the badge on his chest catching the fading sunlight. That's for a judge to decide, not us standing here. The federal marshal beside him, a lean man with a scar across his chin, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, his hand resting casually near his holster. "And you believe Borges?" John asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "After everything that man has done?" Anna's hand brushed against John's arm, a silent request for patience. She took another step forward, her brown dress billowing slightly in the Kansas wind. "What if I told you I could prove Borges is lying? That I have evidence he's been planning this for months?" The boldness of her claim hung in the air between them. Sheriff Oliveira's eyes flickered toward the federal marshal, a flash of unease crossing his face. "That's quite an accusation, miss." "It's the truth," Anna replied, reaching into her battered leather satchel. The men tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but she slowly withdrew a small leather journal, its edges worn from frequent handling. "I've been tracking Borges since he first appeared in our boarding house," she explained, her thumb running along the journal's spine. "I didn't trust him from the moment he spoke to Mary. There was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating." The federal marshal stepped forward, interest piqued. "What exactly are you claiming, miss?" "I'm claiming that Sheriff Oliveira and Lucas Borges have been working together for weeks," Anna stated, her voice steady despite the danger of her words, "planning to frame John Carter and seize his ranch, and I have dates, times, and details of every meeting they've had." Sheriff Oliveira's face darkened. "That's absurd. You can't possibly." "February 9th, Anna interrupted, opening the journal. "The Abilene Hotel, back room. You met with Borges for 2 hours and discussed how to fabricate charges against the rancher." Her eyes lifted from the page, challenging him. "Shall I continue?" Anna's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the small leather journal, its pages worn from constant handling. She stood her ground between John Carter and the lawmen, her voice gaining strength with each word she read. April 15th, Sheriff Oliveira and Lucas Borges met at the Abilene Hotel, back room. I was serving drinks. Anna flipped the page with practiced precision. Borges paid $200. The sheriff promised to handle Carter when the time comes. The federal marshal's eyes narrowed as he shifted his weight, attention fully captured. Each entry Anna read aloud was meticulously dated and detailed. Times, amounts exchanged, exact words spoken. She described how Borges had orchestrated false witnesses against John, how the sheriff had agreed to delay investigating reports that might have cleared the rancher's name. May 2nd. Borges said, "Once we get Carter's land, we split everything 3 ways." The sheriff laughed and said, "Make sure that sister of hers stays out of the way." Sheriff Oliveira's face drained of color. "She's lying," he sputtered, hand inching toward his holster. "This woman's making up stories to protect a criminal." "I was there," Anna countered, her voice cutting through the evening air like a blade. "I served your whiskey. I emptied your spittoons. I was the girl who brought fresh towels to your room. People say things when they think you're invisible." Her green eyes flashed with righteous anger. "You never once looked at my face." The marshal stepped forward, extending his hand. "Let me see that journal, miss." As the lawman examined the evidence, John watched the transformation on his face, skepticism giving way to grim certainty. The pieces were fitting together, revealing a conspiracy far more extensive than a simple fraud case. "There's more," Anna continued, pulling a folded paper from the back of her journal. "A list of other men Borges has blackmailed across 3 counties. Judges, bankers, ranchers, all paying to keep secrets buried." The marshal turned to Oliveira, his expression hardening. "You've got some explaining to do, Sheriff." John felt a chill as he realized how close he'd come to destruction. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching into every corner of local power. For months, perhaps years, Borges had been building his web, waiting for the perfect moment to ensnare him. "How long have you been collecting this information?" John whispered to Anna. "Since the day Borges first came to our boarding house," she answered quietly. Something about him felt wrong. "I've learned to trust that feeling." As the marshal demanded answers from the increasingly desperate sheriff, John saw Anna in a new light. Not just a woman of courage, but of remarkable foresight and intelligence. She had been fighting this battle long before he knew there was a war. The breaking point arrived when Anna revealed Borges had shown Mary photographs of supposed victims, women with bruised faces and tear-stained cheeks, all claimed to be John's former wives, who had mysteriously disappeared after arriving at the ranch. The federal marshal's expression darkened with each revelation, but when Anna pulled out the final piece of evidence, the atmosphere shifted entirely. "This woman," Anna said, pointing to a photograph of a blonde woman with a blackened eye, "is Elizabeth Winters. Borges claimed John beat her before selling her to miners in Colorado." Her voice grew stronger. "Except she's not missing or dead. She lives in Oak Ridge, married to the blacksmith there. I spoke with her 3 days ago." Sheriff Roberto Oliveira's face drained of color. The federal marshal turned to him, hand moving to his holster. "Is this true, Sheriff?" "She's lying," Oliveira stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "These women are all alive," Anna interrupted. "Every single one. I've tracked down 4 of them already. Borges staged those photographs, paid those women to pose as victims." The marshal's voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff Oliveira, I'm ordering you to surrender your badge pending investigation." What happened next unfolded heartbeats. Oliveira's hand flew to his gun, desperation in his eyes. The marshal shouted a warning. John lunged forward instinctively to protect Anna. A shot cracked through the air. Anna yanked John sideways with surprising strength, pulling him behind the water trough as bullets splintered wood around them. Her breath came fast against his ear, her body pressed against his in the narrow space. Despite the danger, John felt an electric awareness of her closeness, the scent of her hair, the fierce determination in her eyes. "I've been waiting for this moment," she whispered, pressing something cold and metal into his palm. A small brass key gleamed in the fading light. "The barn. There's something Mary left behind. You need to see it." John's fingers closed around the key. "You knew this would happen?" Anna's eyes met his, a mixture of fear and resolve. "I hoped it wouldn't. But I've been preparing since I found out what Borges was planning." Another shot rang out, followed by a heavy thud. The marshal's voice called the all clear. As they cautiously emerged from cover, John saw Sheriff Oliveira sprawled in the dirt, clutching his shoulder, his deputy already in handcuffs. Looking at Anna, disheveled, brave, and somehow more beautiful in this moment of chaos, John realized she had been 3 steps ahead of everyone from the beginning. Whatever waited in the barn might change everything, but one thing was already clear. Anna was nothing like the bride he had ordered, and for that, he was increasingly grateful. The night wrapped around them as Anna led John Carter across the yard toward the weathered barn. Only the faintest moonlight guided their steps, their breaths visible in the cool Kansas air. "I've been here before," Anna confessed, her voice barely audible above the distant commotion at the ranch house. "Mary and I visited 2 weeks ago. She wanted to leave a letter for you, but after seeing everything you'd built, this life you created, she changed her mind." John's expression tightened. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "I needed to know what kind of man you truly were first," she replied, her green eyes reflecting determination in the darkness. Inside the barn, Anna moved with surprising familiarity, navigating between stacked hay bales toward the back corner. She pointed to a loose floorboard. There, she hid something beneath it. John retrieved the key she'd pressed into his palm earlier, its metal cold against his skin. Beneath the floorboard sat an old trunk, weathered but sturdy. The keys slid into the lock with a satisfying click. When they lifted the lid, both gasped. The trunk contained dozens of letters, photographs, and documents, a meticulous record of Lucas Borges's years of corruption and blackmail. Names of judges, businessmen, and officials across 3 territories appeared in the damning evidence, a web of deceit that stretched far beyond their personal conflict. "He's been doing this for years," Anna whispered, sorting through the papers. "Creating false debts, manipulating people, destroying lives." John's fingers trembled as he discovered a sealed envelope addressed to him in unfamiliar handwriting. Breaking the seal, he read Mary's words, not the Mary he'd imagined through letters, but the real young woman he'd never met. "Borges has my brother Thomas," he read aloud, his voice breaking. "He took him 3 months ago, said he'd sell him to work in the mines if I didn't cooperate. Everything I've done was to keep him alive." Anna covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "She never told me about Thomas. I thought she was just scared of the debts." John set the letter down, a fierce resolve hardening his features. "Mary isn't a runaway. She's a prisoner." Anna wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. "What do we do now?" "We ride at dawn," John said, gathering the evidence into a leather satchel. "The federal marshal will want this. Then we find Borges, and we free Mary and Thomas." As they secured the trunk, their hands brushed together. For a moment, they paused, the connection between them undeniable, despite the chaos surrounding them. "I came here expecting to face a stranger," Anna said softly. "I never expected to find an ally." John's hand found hers in the darkness. "Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together." With the truth in their possession and a newfound trust between them, they prepared to reclaim their lives from the shadows of betrayal.